Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today in our International Routes to Publishing panel. In this panel, we'll explore how to expand our readership beyond the US and beyond English-speaking countries. I am Brenda Ratchik, a Mexico City native. I'm the author of Brujas Nest, coming out in 2026 with Creature Publishing. And I've also published some short stories that they have found a home in places such as Polymorphic Magazine, BDA Publishing Anthology, and others. I was the editor of popular fiction in the Stone Coast Review magazine, and I hold an MFA from USM. And I'm a writehive mentor right now. It's been a wonderful experience. So let's all introduce ourselves before we begin our panel. Cristina, would you like to do the honors?
Thank you, Brenda. My name is Cristina Jurado, Cristina Jurado for those who cannot pronounce Spanish. And I am a speculative fiction writer, translator, editor, and promoter from Spain, although I live in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai. I've been publishing speculative fiction and editing speculative fiction for the last 12, 13 years. And my short stories in English have been published in venues such as Strange Horizons, Clark's World, Apex Magazine, and other collections. In Spanish, I have few titles like De Naranja al Azul, Bionautas, Limítrofes, and Mil Desiertos. And in English, you can find my short collection of stories called Alpha Lynn and Other Tales. And I just published very recently Chlorophilia, my eco-horror novel with Apex Publishing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cristina. How about you, Moniza?
Thank you, Brenda. My name is Moniza, and I am a Singaporean author. Originally, my family is from Bangladesh, and I currently live in Manchester, so very international. I am a children's author. I have a book coming out later this year in October. It's called Street Puppy Masjid Cat, and it's a picture book about the unlikely friendship between a stray dog and a cute little pampered cat. It's a very sweet story. I also have another picture book that's coming out next year, and that's called Ritu in the Sun. Ritu in the Sun is a story about colorism, but it's also a story that's a celebration of brown skin. And later on in 2026, I have a middle grade novel that's coming out, a horror novel called The Fear Factory. And Fear Factory is about a boy who visits his grandmother and finds his mom's ghost trapped in his grandma's house. His mom's ghost is the same age as him, and together they have to solve a mystery to figure out why she's been trapped at that age. So I write a whole bunch of different types of books, but they're all for children. So that's me. Ooh, I'm sorry. I have short stories as well that I've forgotten about. I have a wonderful story in the Being Ace anthology that has been nominated for a bunch of different awards. And later this year, I have a short story that's coming out in an anthology called The Beast Beneath the Winds. And it's about different types of mythological creatures that from Southeast Asian culture. Yeah, sorry, that's it. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's amazing. Thank you so much. Very eclectic. I love it. And Vanessa, please, would you introduce yourself?
My name is Vanessa Ricci-Thode. My pronouns are she, they. I live in Canada near Toronto. I'm a Nebula-nominated fantasy author, and I have mostly self-published works. My book recently released as of the airing of this panel is the one here, The Dragon Next Door. It's an ace romantasy that I really love. I have several books in my Dragon Rider series, Fireborn, that are out. Those started out, the first book was published through a small press, and I took the rights back and have published myself. And I have a short story coming out in Completely blanking on that, sorry. But I do have a short story coming out soon.
Hi everyone, I'm Arva Bhavnagarwala. I'm based in Mumbai, India. I'm a pediatrician by profession, and I started my writing journey back in 2016 when I first began to write blogs on parenting and gradually drifted towards fiction, short stories, and finally novels. Uh, so, um, uh, and recently, from early this year, I've also dipped my feet a little bit into writing picture books. So let's see where that takes me as well.
Yeah, so I would like to hear from all of you more about your path to publication. Um, so I don't know who would like to start this conversation.
So I didn't have a completely conventional publishing route. I started out as an editor. I was a freelance editor here in Canada. I was part of the organization. It's called Editors Canada now. And I was also writing at the time. And an acquaintance was starting a press, knew that I was a writer and asked to see some of my work. And that was how my first book got published. So no querying, nothing, no agent. I've never had an agent. So it's been a little bit weird for me. I did do some querying. I did look for agents. I have, because I'm not in the US, I'm very close to the US, but not actually in it, which makes it pretty difficult to get published. And the US is the big market. But yeah, it's been pretty inaccessible to me. And the trad publishing the whole industry is pretty tough right now. And I figured if I'm doing all the work, I don't want to share the profits because there's not very many of those. So I did get my rights back to my books and I've been self-publishing since. And social media works fairly well for me. So I have been using that to sort of leverage my work and using Kickstarter to fund the editing and the art for my books.
How about you, Cristina?
So I always lived in a country where I wasn't publishing. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but for whatever reason, when I started to try to get published in my country, in Spain, I was living in France. And then I moved after living in 3 different continents and 4 different countries. It's been always very difficult to find a way into my own country, even though I write. So my case is a little special because I write in Spanish and in English. Sometimes ideas come in English, sometimes they come in Spanish. And for the Spanish part, in the beginning, as I mentioned before, I didn't know anybody and I wasn't even living there. So I had to try to get my way into the market, or at least the fandom. So I started just through social media and through my blog, trying to reach out, and then it started to get involved in projects, and that's how you start to learn about other people and start to make connections with the publishing companies in at least in Spain. And then one thing I didn't know is that when you write speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, new weird, horror, agents, at least in my country, they're almost allergic to you. So I know that's not the case in other countries, but I feel very, very close to where Vanessa was mentioning before. So I don't have an agent, and I don't think I can get one because, again, you don't make a lot out of your royalties. So to share the little that you get from your work, it's kind of like doesn't make it very convenient or very efficient at all from any perspective. And then because I speak English, and sometimes when they need somebody who speaks English to deal with people outside the Spanish fandom, they kind of ask me to step in. I help with a lot of conventions and different activities, and that's how I get to know other authors and other editors. And I started to then think about maybe I should submit things in English, the things that I was coming up. And thankfully enough, I love to write short fiction. It's one of my weaknesses. And I started to send out, I think everybody knows, the submission grinder. And so I started to send out, and I don't know why I got picked by a few. And so then it's, once you get your foot in the door, it's easier to make yourself known. So when I approach Apex for, I'm not sure you pronounce it Apex or Apex. I say Apex in Spanish. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing. But when I had Chlorophilia, because it was extremely weird, I knew if we had to had a home, it would be Apex. So I pitched to them, but because I knew them already, I've worked with them in other projects. So it wasn't just screaming in the dark. It was already we had a relationship somehow. So it was kind of easy. They, in the sense that they loved the idea. So my way for my first novel to come out was very easy in that sense. I know other authors have a lot of difficulties to come out, at least from from Spain or from Europe, to be published in bigger markets like the English circuit. But in my case, because of maybe my weakness was my strength, I was able to communicate in English with many people and create connections that helped me.
So yeah, I've had a very similar kind of experience with publishing with Cristina, in that I am from Singapore. I'm Singaporean. So in 2012, when I first started really thinking about becoming a published author, I looked at the market in Singapore, and at that point, it was very much a literary market. So if you wanted to publish locally, and there are some very, very good local publishers who are based in Singapore, and Singapore has a thriving literary community. But at that point, the community was geared a lot more towards literary fiction. And that's just not something I've ever wanted to write. Not that there's anything wrong with literary fiction. I love reading it, but it's just not something I enjoy writing. I wanted to write genre fiction. So I knew that was not an avenue that was open for me at that point. And in 2012, because I'm Singaporean, because I'm brown, and for all of those reasons, the North American market wasn't actually very open to me either. So I kind of just gave up and didn't really pursue publishing very much. And then in 2016, things changed a little bit. We Need Diverse Books was launched, which made the market, the North American market, a little bit more receptive to people like me, people who are writing stories about marginalized characters, brown people, essentially. And while I think there's a misconception, people think that at that point, people just wanted stories about, brown characters, but that's not true at all. A small piece of the pie had been opened up for people like me. So that opened up North American publishing to me a little bit more. And in 2018, I finally got around to querying, and that's how I got my agent. And that led to this lovely little book, Street Puppy Masjid Cat, which comes out later on this year. And it's a story about a cat that lives in a mosque. And that's the kind of story that I don't think I could have published back in 2012, but there's more space for stories like that now.
First started writing parenting blogs, I realized that I like to make up things a little better than writing what I'm actually experiencing. So, and that with that idea in mind, I began to write short stories, and it resonated well with the readers. And then that's how I was like, okay, I submitted to many anthologies, and I got published in various Indian magazines and other multiple anthologies. And then I thought, okay, this is doing well. And then I had some ideas of writing longer versions. And so that's how my first novel happened. It was a contemporary romance. Unfortunately, it's not yet published, but that's still there on my laptop waiting to see the light of the day. Then after that, ideas kept appearing, and that's when I finished my second book, And in 2021, I began to query Indian agents and publishers, but there wasn't much interest. And that was the year when I discovered the writing community of Twitter, now X. And that has changed my life a lot. That's like how I learned how to query what are the word count limits in international publishing, how to go about it, and so taught myself all these things. And then I began querying American and London, UK-based agents, publishers. And I landed my book deal in 2023 with a small publisher called Sherazad Shelves. And my first book, A Little Bit of Love, is now in the market. It's a contemporary romance set in Mumbai, India, featuring Mumbai local trains and Muslim protagonists from a middle class background. It's done okay. The reviews are good, so that makes me happy. And now currently I'm querying my second book, hoping it might get published. I don't know. Let's see. Fingers crossed for that.
Are there countries that that you consider to be easier to publish in? You could start, Moniza, since you mentioned the Winnie Diverse books and all these different opportunities.
I don't know if there are countries that are necessarily easier to publish in. I think it's difficult everywhere because it's a very saturated market and the challenges are always greater, especially if you're from a marginalized background, if you're writing about minority characters, and writing in a voice that might be a minority voice. It's always a little harder. Internationally, the language that generally tends to be the international language is English. So there are lots of barriers, but for me, I've only ever really attempted to sell books to the North American market, and that's the only market I have had success in. So I don't really know if there's a easier market elsewhere. I wish I had tried in Singapore, but it's not a market I've ever attempted to sell a story in, unfortunately, because by the time Singapore was open to kind of like books from genre fiction, I had already kind of like set my route in the North American route.
Thank you. Yeah. And how about you, Vanessa?
No, yeah, I agree with Moniza. And it's interesting what Cristina said about getting published where you live or your home country, and speculative fiction not really being as accepted. Because I'm in Canada, we have lots of grants, but they're all inaccessible to me because I write speculative fiction, and most of the grants are regional based, so they want it set in the region where you live. And well, there's no space station, there's no dragons in my city, sorry. So I haven't been able to get any grants, and that makes it more difficult. There are a few publishing houses who do speculative fiction, but again, Canada's very small, so we don't have a lot. And again, it's saturated, it's very competitive, and it was interesting what everyone was saying about we need diverse books. And part of what pushed me away from trying to be traditionally published was my books are queer. They have queer themes, they have queer characters, and getting the feedback, this is great, but we already have one of these. So I just was like, fine, I'll do it myself. Yeah, it's a tough industry wherever you are. And I think if you're writing the right kind of genre, sometimes grants are open to you and there's more publishing opportunities locally. The North American market is tough to get into, but that seems to be the one because English speaking, as the global language, seems to be the one that everybody wants to be published through.
I coincide with what Moniza and Vanessa were saying, and you may think that it's easier in your home country, maybe, but I think it's kind of universal as I'm now seeing everybody agreeing that speculative fiction is always kind of marginalized to give more resources to other genres because they are more serious, because they are more literary, because they are more in general. I think there is this idea that they're of a higher quality. And I completely disagree with that. And I think probably we all disagree, because I don't think that is a problem with quality, but I think maybe because people associate speculative fiction directly with science fiction, which was, as we know it now, a genre that started as popular and in those very cheap magazines. People have this misconception that anything that comes from those genres is just page turning with no with no body, with no soul. And there is nothing wrong with being a page turner. It's a great thing. But many of those stories are extremely deep, and they present interesting topics, and they are fearless in trying new things. And as by the examples that we hear with Moniza and with Vanessa, right? And it is true that there's a little bit more of maybe in front of everybody, in front of the gallery, everybody's saying, yeah, we need more diversity, but that's just sometimes just talk, like just words, not the reality. The reality is that there's very little resources and very little encouragement. And it's just that I find it very frustrating, because some of the most daring initiatives in literature have come from the speculative fiction world. I remember in 2014, there was almost, believe it or not, no female science fiction writers in my country. And because they were not being published. To try to correct this, we had to do what Vanessa was saying, fund ourselves with the crowdfunding to create the first anthology of science fiction stories written by women in Spanish. And we opened it also for Latin America. And then there was a project called Alucinadas, which we were able to translate into English. So much so that Pamela Sargent, who was the woman behind Woman of Wonder series, the collections of stories written by women, and in the science fiction, she allowed us to use the name Woman of Wonder, and we call it Spanish Woman of Wonder in English. And so we had to do everything ourselves to be able to, send this to the world. And not only that, we were nominated to awards. One of the stories was even won the Ignotus Award, which is our Hugo. It's the awards that the Spanish Association of Fantasy, Science Fiction, and Horror gives annually. Just to say that, I don't know why, but if you are a writer, you are already daring to do things. If you are a female writer or non-binary, or you come from a certain type of ethnic background that is not the white, heterosexual, blah, 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 you are also very much in the margins. And I think that because we reclaim those spaces with our own projects, sometimes we had to do everything on our own, that we're able to do things differently and reclaim the public space.
Each country would have their specific guidelines and specific genres that they are interested in. Like, for example, India is mainly a market for non-fiction and literary fiction. And of late, translations are doing pretty well in India. And I don't write any of these genres. So considering that, like my approach towards international publishing was with that idea in mind, that romance is something that is not easily get published by traditional publishers in India, unless you have great contacts or you're an influencer or something like that. So, another thing is, if you have enough resources, it's easier to self-publish if you find the right editors, the right cover designers. And so that would be a little easier in India. But unfortunately, I don't have those kinds of resources. Besides, publishers in India ask for money, which is again like a vanity publishing, which I'm not interested in. And agents asking for money is again a big red flag. So that's why my mindset was pretty clear that I don't want to pay anyone to get published. If I had that kind of money, I would rather self-publish. I don't want to and have full control of my own book. So I don't think it's easier to publish in any country. I mean, you have to work hard towards it.
Yeah, and some people don't like it, but others really crave it. We want to be seen. And I was wondering if you edit the content of your books depending on where you're publishing. Like, do you find yourself explaining more about your culture, things like that? Um, Moniza, would you like to begin with this?
Sure. So I think the book that is beside me right now is a good example of that, Street Puppy Masjid Cat. In the title itself, there's the word masjid, which means mosque. It's an Arabic word that means mosque. And you may not be familiar with that word if you are not Muslim. But we chose to keep these words because they're a part of the story and they give important kind of textural detail. So one way in which we kind of got around the unfamiliar words is at the back of the book, I just added, you can just flip over and you can take a look and see what the words mean. So that makes it easier. With other books, I've had to kind of rely on context a little bit. So if there are words that are unfamiliar, like for example, in my book, Ritu in the Sun, it's a story about a little girl who faces challenges because of her skin tone. And one of the characters is her grandmother, and she calls her grandmother Nani. So Nani is a Bengali word. And if you don't know it, you may not understand that. But based on the context, it's quite clear that when she says Nani, what she means is grandmother. And when her Nani calls her Baba, that's like a term of affection. So it's kind of like you can rely on context quite a bit in order to convey these words that people may be unfamiliar with. But we are still writing in English, and I think it's important to think about like what exactly is your goal? Do you want to be intelligible to a broad range of readers, including people outside of your cultural background? And I do want my stories. I want my stories to be representing people from my culture, but also to appeal to people outside of my culture as well. Both. I don't want to alienate either group. So when I write with that kind of mindset. And if I do use words or cultural things that may be unfamiliar, I always make sure that there's enough context so that no one is alienated, so that the book feels welcoming to everyone.
I have not yet had that experience of editing my content to suit a particular market. Fortunately for me, my editor at the press was really understanding, and she let me keep all the cultural references, and I didn't even have to italicize any local words. And I think that's the point, right? If you're reading a book from a different country, from a different culture, that's the point. You get to know the country, you get to know the culture. If the local words are used, even if they are used sparingly. So we read books from different countries, right? We don't. I have not come across anyone going out of their way to explain a particular thing. It just flows naturally. So I have not yet done that. I don't know about it in the future, but at present, I have never had to edit content to suit a particular audience.
I do rely on context quite a bit. I write speculative fiction. It's fantasy. There's a lot of made up words. I don't have a glossary in my book, but I do rely on context for things that aren't English, things that are completely made up to be true. I sort of feel like because I write in speculative fiction, I would hope that readers are used to words that are made up and will just sort of latch onto context in things that are perhaps more cultural. Some of the queer stuff that I include, I don't sit and explain it at length. Please catch it from the context. One thing I have done, I'm Canadian. Canadian English is slightly different from American English and from British English, and I have maintained the Canadian spelling. I did put a note at the front of the book saying this, it's not an error. This is how we do it in Canada. I haven't published in markets outside of English, North American markets. So I'm not sure about, I know there are some of the topics in my books would probably not be acceptable in some places, and I feel like I probably would just not publish there because it's important for me that the content remains the same. I would love to have my books translated though. So that's something to think about in the future. Again, I refuse to use AI, so it's a matter of money and making sure I have enough to pay a translator what they're worth. But yeah.
And what do you think, Cristina?
So with this book in particular, with Chlorophilia, something funny happened. I had contact Sue Burke, which is a wonderful translator, but she is herself a wonderful science fiction author. And she lived for many, many years in Madrid, and she was kind enough to take on the translation of my book. But the editor told me, oh, we are 5,000 words short, and we really, really need those because otherwise it doesn't make any sense to produce the book, because we have to have a minimum amount of pages. And I was like, oh my God. So if now I have to write in Spanish something more, then send it to Sue, she has to translate it, then I have to edit it. It's gonna take forever. So I consulted with her and I said, okay, what if I tried to write directly into English and then you corrected it? Would that make sense? Would you be comfortable doing that? Because I wanted to do something that it makes also sense for her. When you are working on a book that is translated, it's a partnership. If you understand the of course the language, if you can read that language that it's been translated into. So she said yes. She encouraged me, and I thought, well, she's gonna trash everything, obviously. But luckily not, because I've been a translator also for now a few years, and I've been paying attention to structure. She came to me, maybe she just wanted to be nice, but she said, no, actually it's not that bad. It's quite, I've used quite a lot of what you wrote, and I just did some, polishing. And so it was faster than what it would have been if I had to write directly into Spanish. So this is kind of like a hybrid. It suits the book, which is kind of like also about hybrid creatures. So it suits the process. It suits the process suits the theme. And where Moniza was also saying, and also Vanessa, about translating. I translated other things, other short stories. I didn't translate. Somebody else translated for me. But she actually asked me to maintain certain words in Spanish. Not many, just few. And she said, I think it's very good that we ask a little bit from the readers, in the sense that don't say what it means. They're going to find it out in the context. They're not very difficult to come up with. But she said, you have to make, if you want, I think you should make the point of leave some things in Spanish. And I think she was right. And I just wanted to thank, her name is Monica Luzon. I hope she doesn't mind me telling, but she's a wonderful translator too. And I've learned so much from my translators. I can't thank them enough for working with me.
Thank you, Cristina. Yes, I leave words in Spanish too in my work, and I think it really adds to the flavor of the story. And we already kind of discussed this, but I would like to discuss it further. That are there genres that are better received internationally? What do you think, Vanessa?
Oh, I think it depends. Internationally, like globally, I don't think so. I know that fantasy in particular seems to be really well received in Germany and Spain, and I get a lot of sales from the UK. Um, and then there's barriers to the global south too. So I know that I don't make a lot of sales there because there's banking issues that I've just been learning about recently. I have a friend in India who can't run Kickstarters because there's no way for Kickstarter to send her the money, which I frankly think is ridiculous. But I don't know how we fix that. I'm bad at money and banking and this sort of thing. But yeah, there are all these barriers, and so yeah, I feel like people in the global south probably have better access to the global south already because you're there, and then there's that barrier of coming north and west, and then it's the same going the other way, where I don't know how well I can get my books into places like my friend in India and that sort of thing. I do publish through places like Amazon, unfortunately, and they do some of that work for me, but when it comes to like Kickstarters, no, it's a very Western, Northern Hemisphere sort of platform, and I don't know if there's something similar like a crowdfunding in the global south, but there's definitely problems that need to be fixed, and so yeah, it's sort of like it depends.
Thank you. And Moniza, what do you think? Are
Oh
there
gosh, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I don't know if I'm the right person to pitch in on this because, you know, my books have the world rights belong to the publishers, but they're published in North America. So I don't know how these books would sell in other countries. Like right now, for example, for Street Puppy Majid Cat, it's only being sold in the North American market. It's not even going to come out in Singapore, which is where I'm from, and in Manchester, where I'm living. So I don't know if there are certain books that sell better, certain genres that sell better internationally, because I haven't experienced it yet in my career. I hope I will. Fingers crossed.
As far as I know, in my country, it works fantasy, as Vanessa already said. And it looks like, for what I know, in Europe, it's quite strong too, probably in North America. I don't know why. Science fiction is very, very not very well represented, especially by local authors. And what I see is a asymmetrical situation where there is an enormous amount of translations from English into Spanish, but no way the reverse. The amount of books that are from Spain translated into English or any other languages is very, very small. I don't understand why, because supposedly it's more expensive to translate a book than maybe, paying a local author to write one. But for whatever reason, because they come with, awards or mentions or the bestsellers in their countries or whatever, it seems that the publishers rely more on international authors, especially English speaking, from North America and the UK, even Australia. And I don't understand why, in the case of Spanish, we don't have a stronger market, because if you think about it, it's a fairly large country market, but for some reason there's a lot of problems, administrative probably, or logistic, to get books across the Atlantic.
Yeah, so in India, it's mainly non-fiction and literary fiction and translations, as I said earlier. So genres like fantasy, science fiction, thrillers, romance, I think are better suited for an international market, because these would also have an authentic Indian flavor, Indian background that would be more widely appreciated by a bigger audience. Here in India, usually people, if you tell anyone I read romance or I read this, they would like, oh, you don't read self-help books, you don't read this. So it's very, I wouldn't share my reading habits as freely with anyone as here as compared to other places. So yes, I think there are all these genres that are better suited for an international market.
What should you consider before publishing internationally?
Yeah, I think it kind of plays off of what Cristina said when Cristina was mentioning in her own country, when she goes to the bookstores, the books she sees are translated from the North American market. And that's the same case in Singapore. If you go into a Singaporean bookstore, though to be fair, Singapore is very small. We're a very tiny country, so the chances of us producing enough books to fill up an entire bookstore on our own are not very high to begin with. But the majority of the books that you will see in a Singaporean bookstore would be from the US or from the UK. And I think that's the case actually for most countries. And I think the reason for that is the biggest slice of the book market belongs in North America. So if a book performs well, it's likely to perform well in that market. And then when it performs well in that market, then the whole world is interested in that book. So it gets translated and then it sells rights to different countries, and then it gets published in those different countries in the languages of those countries. Singapore's, the language is English, so it doesn't even need to be translated. It just gets sold their Commonwealth rights. So that's, I think, the reason why I didn't decide in such a calculated way that, oh, because the money is in North America, because the bulk of the market is in North America, I will go to try and attempt to publish in North America. For me, it was very much a case of there is no market for me in my country, so I might as well attempt to sell in North America. And that's why I did it. But at this point, if you're making those calculations, there are two things you should think about. One is, do you want to sell more, or do you want to sell a specific type of book? Because if you want to sell to a North American market, you will likely sell more, but you will have to compromise a lot in terms of your voice, the kind of information you put in the book. You will have to make yourself a little bit more legible to an audience outside of your country. If you sell just to your country, you can really just write for the audience you're familiar with. And that book may not necessarily be well accepted elsewhere. So that's a choice you have to make. There are other benefits to selling in your country as well. If you sell in your country, you're selling with a publisher who is in your country, and that usually means that they have the connections to send you to the different bookstores, to set you up in schools and stuff. And that makes it much easier to promote your book. This is the kind of perk that an American writer already enjoys because they're based in the US. But if you're an international author and you're publishing in the US, then there's always the barrier of not being able to promote your book as well as an American author. And that can be such a disadvantage for you. You can do things through Zoom, and I have done that. But it's not the same as being able to go to bookstores, and it's not the same as being able to literally go to schools, which is what American authors can do. Yeah, so these are things that you should think about. But ultimately, if you're just thinking about like the greatest amount of reach, traditional publishers based in the UK and the US probably have the largest share of the market.
I think one of the things Moniza was talking about making things sort of legible to people outside of where you're from. I think it's sort of a translation, but it's more of a cultural translation, or things that you have to consider. I mean, even within Canada, we have different regionalisms where, sometimes people from the west of Canada don't understand the slang of people on the East Coast. So, and I know Italy has that problem too. My family's Italian, so we always learn about the dialects and how Sicily can't talk to Molise or whatever. But anyway, there are like those sorts of considerations to take into account. And yes, what you want to do with your book. Do you want to reach a lot of people? Do you want to just reach your tiny little, your locality where you are? Because that where you're publishing depends what you're going to put into your books, how you're going to market them. And again, do you want to deal with what traditional publishing has to offer? And that was something that I did ultimately reject. But then self-publishing, yes, I have all the control, but I have all the responsibility. I have all the work. It's a lot of work. It's so much work. So that's definitely something to consider as well if you're going to go that route, is how much work is it? Can you do it? Most authors find the marketing and the publicity part of self-publishing just absolutely brutal. I'm an extrovert. I'm okay at it. Until recently, I could go to conventions in the United States and make some connections and expand my audience that way. I'm relying entirely on virtual events like this one and the tiny, I think there's two speculative fiction conventions in Canada right now. And so relying very heavily on that and on my social media reach in order to get my books to readers, it's difficult. And I do wish that I had more access to the US, but it's currently deeply unsafe for me for anybody to go there right now. So it's tough. And so there's just a lot to consider. And yeah, I think Moniza covered it really well with what do you want to do?
I completely agree with Moniza and Vanessa, what they said. And I also would add that we have to understand that, or people should understand that, okay, one thing is writing, right? Everybody can write. Other thing is publishing. It's not everybody can, because it means to reach out and to collaborate with other people. So then other thing is to market what your work, which normally is the publishing company's work, or in the case that you're self-published, it falls into you. But all of that, you have to either do it yourself or be available to do it. And then it happened to me when I published Chlorophyll. I wasn't able to do signings or events in person. So what I normally do is, okay, what do we need? Maybe we need a space to talk and in the virtual world about new releases in speculative fiction. So I started a YouTube channel to talk about that, and I realized that what I needed to do is to give others this opportunity, because many international authors cannot come to Spain to talk about their releases in Spanish. So I give them this little window, and we make it just focus on the book they're releasing. We're not talking 2 hours on their, career, but just on this book and what it means for the Spanish audience and what it means for them, etc. And I realize it's working well, because there was a need for that, because sometimes you can't travel for the reasons, Vanessa was mentioning. Some of the reasons it's not safe sometimes to go to certain places. But this that we're doing right now, we can do it, and we should take advantage of it, in the sense that also something that is available is that when you upload something in YouTube, if it's in English, you can actually see the translation. You can have closed captions in Spanish, and that, for the people that are not familiar with English, or they don't feel comfortable going through a presentation in English, it's brings them an incentive to stay and learn about the book. And so sometimes we need to do things ourselves that are not out there, because otherwise nobody would do them. So you have to come up with creative ways to reach out, and not just for you, but because you see there is a gap and somebody has to do it. And I also was the director of the magazine for 5 years, of a speculative fiction in Spain, Supersonic, and we feature things in Spanish and in English when nobody was doing that. So sometimes you have to do the thing that nobody is doing, because, well, somebody has to. and if you can, well, you at least you can help others, and support the it's not so much for yourself, but for others that don't have that capacity, or they can't do it.
One should research well. Like, suppose North America is the largest publishing industry at present, so most of us target to get published out there. So we need to research well what kind of genres do they accept, the word count, how to write a professional query letter, the synopsis, and basically you need to have the whole package ready. Research your agents well, or publishers, whatever mode you're choosing. And with that plan in mind, you can like dip your feet in the query trenches and then get completely drowned.
This was great. That would be like the end of our panel, but I wanted to thank you for taking the time of talking to me, answering the questions, and I'm sure this will be very helpful for a lot of people who are considering the different roads to publishing.